Hello, this is Branko Malic of Kali Tribune. In this podcast, unfortunately, we return to a problem that we dealt with multiple times in the past few months. That is to be precise, in the springtime, with an emergence of the new Joan of Arc of climate change, quote unquote, a little Greta Thunberg. So we talked about the figure of this holy fool, holy child already. So I say unfortunately because it is never very good to dwell upon those transient matters and phenomena that will be forgotten in a year or two. But this one is very hard to avoid, not only because it is ever present, it is omnipresent. That is to say, this idea that climate is catastrophically changes and that we will die in a very short span of time if we don't act now. Of course, this has nothing to do with the truth. It contradicts common sense because they are saying this for decades and nothing happened. And common sense teaches us, if anything, it teaches you that repetition of a wrong assumption implies that the very essence of assumption, its very subject, is wrong. What I'm interested in, what made me keep this constantly in my mind is something else, and that's the ability of otherwise highly intelligent people to fall for this and to repeat this bullshit. I have privilege of living in a rather backwards country where things like this are not so much on the table. They are the thing of minorities, of, as they like to think of themselves, quote unquote, thinking minorities, mostly on the left, not mostly but totally on the left, and of very crude intellectual quality. But despite this, in contrast to Western left, this is the left that has some continuity with a real left, with the communist regime that used to reign here. So a good deal of those leftists are a bit awkward about these things because they have this other motives in their political ideology, political trajectory. But nevertheless, there is a school strike for climate in Croatia. It was not so well advertised as it was in the Western countries. As it happened, I was working had a brief stint of work in school this spring, but just after this climate, what they call it, school strike for climate, that was spearheaded by this little Swedish Joan of Arc. If I was doing a high school teacher job at the time, I would oppose high school kids participating in this, or at least I would give them a second opinion why this is wrong. And I wouldn't lose a job because of it. This is still possible in Croatia and these East European countries, at least some of them. Not so much because of different kind of people in government, but because of inertia of institutions. They are not so quick to prosecute you for wrong thing as they are in the West. And the other thing is that when you go to school in rural Croatia to work as a teacher, 90% or even more of those kids are churchgoers, come from families that still, at least formally, still cling to some kind of tradition. Maybe the Pope of Rome could learn a few things about Catholic faith from them, and their faith is not something to write home about it, but its existence, whereas in the case of the said gentleman, I'm not so sure. But that's another topic completely. Now, I was browsing through latest issues of Greta Thunberg soap opera and this movement, pretty desperate attempt to put this so-called climate change in the center of all concerns in the world. And she was having a testimony, so-called testimony between US Congress. It was not a testimony, it was her just repeating in accordance with her age, repeating some of those platitudes about end of the world and so on. And I felt sympathy for that girl, felt sorry for her, and because she was not, the talk was not so much scripted, and then you see a child that is put in the midst of world attention artificially, and you could tell that she's a bit uneasy and so on. I felt sorry for her. Well, that's a character flaw that one pays for in blood later in life, because one should not feel sorry for people of that kind, of people from that milieu, no matter her own personal innocence in a matter, because she's part of machinery that is, I think, very much unforgiving. But nevertheless, what fascinated me is that top politicians are really seriously talking about this. And the other thing is that some people I know, some of my teachers from faculty, from people whom I held in the highest regard, not for the intelligence in the sense of academic intelligence, but overall wisdom they possessed, sucking upon this idiocy unceasingly, constantly repeating these platitudes with calling upon IPCC reports, which they surely never read. I took the trouble of reading one, I think the 5th issue, for a series of essays I wrote about the matter. It's not easy read, but it's very clear that this is a political compilation of selected scientific works that are molded into political, ideological straitjacket, because the first and greater part of those reports is always political guidelines, what to do, and those are the guidelines that have all the refinement and all the political wisdom of 14 or 13 years old autistic child. So it's no wonder that they took this poor Swedish girl as a standard bearer. So my answer to why, when you see people who you used to respect highly, look up as very young, turn to idiots, you doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be idiots. It has to be stupider, dumber than you. You kind of start questioning yourself, because if they were always that dumb, and you can't get dumb overnight, you can't get blinded overnight, then maybe the whole of your trajectory in your previous life had a dumbness inherent in itself, because well, you were looking up to these people who were ready to make very radical steps in following their advice and so on, and now you see that you have a one-eyed functioning. You see, you are a one-eyed man, and they are blind. They're completely blind. So this is something that I find utterly fascinating in all this affair. And one of the answers I have for this is that people who fall for this crap are people in academia. One of the demographics that fall for this crap. Excuse me. There are few interconnected demographics that fall for this, and they are not. Let's put this crystal clear: they are not working class, surely, or lower middle class, if we can use a class as a good heuristic term at all. But let's say, for the sake of argument, those are university professors or high-level journalists, high-level in the sense that they work for, in the case of Croatia, for one of these two big corporate-owned media, or national state media. And in the state media here, we still have a tradition of, especially on radio, of keeping some extremely well-educated people. If they fall for this is because their work has long ago became meaningless. Because the whole, in my opinion, the whole rattle and hum about global warming, global cooling, climate change, whatever you want to call it, comes from the inability of a certain political franchise to keep itself alive. And that is what we could call a global left. What Americans call liberalism, which has very little to do with actual liberalism. I think that's fairly obvious. But this social democrat left, supposedly non-communist or semi-communist left, that is in its death throes. Ideologically, that spent all of its symbolic power, and one of its Achilles heel was, I think, precisely this reliance of soft and symbolic power on the long march through institutions and so on, because it doesn't have the striking power of actual communism, which was built upon idea that you have to, in order to have a revolution, you have to build a revolutionary army and explain the people worldwide that revolution is right thing by putting a gun in their mouths. And unfortunately, this idea of the left has to be implemented in the end this way. You have to do it at one point, because this soft power relies upon acceptance and interiorization of its propositions. And this was done masterfully for a spell. I mean, it worked. It developed until it came to the point of absurdity, where it becomes obvious that the tropes as a climate change and as such are completely empty of content. They have nothing in themselves. This is ersatz religion, religion for irreligious people, because people like to reject things that make them feel bad. But on the other hand, they like to keep their semblance, so they reject practically ancestral Christianity in Europe, and but as they have to have some religion, that is to say, they have to feel responsible towards some higher being, they take climate change apocalyptic cult, which is what it boils to, the cult of the end of the world, and our responsibility for it. Although in religion, proper religion, the end of the world is a responsibility of God, because he's the one who created it. And the fall of man and the man's moral failure is just a part of it. Part of the redemptionary process, whereas in this apocalyptic cult it's all about man, because man created this world. That is to say, evolution created it. And make no mistake, evolution is not only biological theory, evolution is a metaphysics. So everything from the anorganic life, anorganic world, it's also evolutionary. It's developing towards something, and it's developing towards man and man's ability to revert it all back, which is posthumanism. It kind of like has to go into this direction, whether they like it or not. And they need a religion for this, and this religion looks upon man as God. And becoming God is also a denial of man. He has to transcend himself and recreate the world, because, in proper religion, world is created before it existed, which is logical. In this religion, a world can be only created in backwards, because it exists. No matter what we think of it, it existed before us. So we have to turn back and recreate it. And posthumanism is simply an avant-garde, a pure logical development and conclusion and resolution of this idea. So we have this, and people who fall for this crap, if they are mature people, not children like Greta Thunberg, those people are guilty of radical evil, in my opinion, of implementing an anti-human religion, trying to implement it. It doesn't work, because masses will not buy into it, and masses are not that important anymore anyway, but the big business and the big politics and still existing nation states just don't buy into it. Especially the greatest polluters as India, China, and so on, although sustainable development is something that was, as far as I hear, implemented in China in a specific sense, but this is because it suits them. The last place of residence of late Maurice Strong was one of the most important people to push this agenda from the early 70s onward was in China, in Beijing. So go figure. Anyway, this is a push towards technocratic global society. It leaks and cracks at every move, because it is completely out of touch with reality as it is, not only a historical moment, but reality as it is, because there is something we call reality, which is a whole, which is something upon which we can judge the truthfulness or untruthfulness of something. And people pushing this, or people advocating for this, especially advocating for this before children, should be called to answer for what they are doing. Now, I don't think this in the sense of some completely opposite dictatorial sense where we would round up climate change promoters and put them on trial, but in the sense of them giving account for what they believe in. and really giving an account, and they won't be able to do this, not only because they don't know science behind it, because that science is, in my opinion, unknowable. That science is impossible. This is the science, this is the idea, apotheosis of modern science into postmodernity is obvious in this climate science, so-called the young science of climate, where there is an idea of having an absolute science that will absolutely predict the behavior of the world understood as a constant change, and then explain it away and clearly define its beginning and its end. In order to do this, one would need to have angelic intelligence. This is not only angelic, over angelic, this is simply not possible. And what is ironic, they took the most mutable, the most variable phenomenon of nature, that is the climate. The climate is by definition in the constant change. And devised some kind of science that would be secular theology, in the sense that you had a time where theologians were those that said what is right and what is wrong, and what is world and what is not world. Now you have these climate scientists telling you that, and they are doing this, of course, in completely dogmatic way, because it has to be in dogmatic way. You cannot build morality and politics upon non-dogmatic principles. This is clearly impossible. To advocate something like that, something so contradictory, is possible only in modernity and postmodernity. But the important thing is that this is a religious science. This is some kind of excuse me. This is something that is in fact contradictio in adjecto. This would be absolutely critical science, that is to say, science that cannot rest for one day, because it is trying to take the world as a whole, meaning Earth as a whole, and giving a model of Earth's behavior in the future and in the past. And they have to change the past, so they try to ditch these periods that were warmer than our periods that were clearly there, which you know from history. But that's a story in itself. I wrote about it at length, and other more competent people in the field than me wrote about it, but it helped none, because believers don't listen to you. They have their dogma. But some of us have our dogmas too, and this is not fight between critical thinking and dogma. This is fight between dogma, true dogma and false dogma. So, not to fool anybody, Kali Tribune is not an alt media site of critical thinkers. We are very uncritical thinkers. We are very dogmatic thinkers, because dogma is a positive content upon which we build. It is the expression of reality, of metaphysical reality, and we are confronting the false, unmetaphysical reality with a true metaphysical reality. That is to say, we are confronting right dogma from wrong dogma. No critical thinking here. And no critical thinking will destroy this climate change or lunacy, this ecological lunacy. And the global left will have to think about what it did. Although, to conclude, I never bought into this right-left dichotomy as something really true. I think that there is a sinister abyss beyond a right and left, creating this crazy leftists or crazy rightists. This is something that comes into not only in the field of conspiracy theory, but in the field of depicting evil that cannot be put in the system. That is to say, evil that is beyond the ideology and that is beyond the left and right. And this evil is something that is not easy to pinpoint, not easy to study, and not very safe to study, as the example of many conspiracy theorists going mad from what they did, what they studied, exemplifies. Anyway, that was our 5 cents or 5 dinara, 5 lipa to say in Croatian. I don't use cents. Fortunately, we don't use euro still. About this matter, once more, I think this is third time. I'm sorry for being repetitive, but I think this time around we also said something fresh. Thank you for your attention. This was Branko Malic of Kali Tribune signing out.